Josh Palmer. I'm the head of content for eScribe. We're hosting today a quick webinar on empowering city clerks with Debi Wilcox. And we'll give it about 1 more minute here, or about 30 seconds, and then we'll get started. All right, I won't stand on ceremony. We'll go ahead and get started. Mentioned empowering city clerks is the subject today. Quick housekeeping notes just about the webinar today and the format we'll be running through here. All guests are mute by default. That's a byproduct of our Zoom webinar platform here. But we do encourage you to submit your questions. You can use either the Q&A feature, which will track your question, or the chat features. We have folks engaged in both those tools and ready to submit your questions and curate them up to me as we get to the Q&A session. There will be a webinar on demand recording, and the slide deck will be sent in a follow-up email before the end of the week here. And once we get going with the conversation, I'll also share the slides for you so you can follow along at home or wherever you may be. Quick agenda about our topic today. We'll start with the introductions, of course. We'll go through kind of what is the current state of city clerks and their well-being, how to avoid some common pitfalls, both in municipal organizations and organizations in general, how to build practical knowledge for building confidence and taking charge of your clerkship, getting a seat at the table, which we all know is so important, and then cultivating well-being and balance. And then we'll wrap up the last 15 to 10 minutes, depending on the session, with a question and answer session with the questions you've submitted throughout the series here. So we'll get started on our next step here. I'm very, very honored and proud to share our speaker today. It's Debi Wilcox. She's a master's of public administration. She has an executive master's in municipal management. She's also a registered parliamentarian. For a short while longer, she will be the CEO of Meeting Solutions Group. She is also the former director of legislative services and a regional clerk for Durham, Ontario, as well as a former town clerk for Whitby, Ontario. Please excuse the canines in the background. You can find more information about her and her services at debiwilcox.com. Debi, so nice to have you here today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Josh. Really thrilled to be here and love being part of all the activities that eScribe do and the resources they provide for clerks. Yeah, great to be here.
We're so lucky to have you. And I think we would both agree that this is actually really, as you mentioned when we first had the conversations planning this webinar, this is a really popular topic. It's gained a lot of interest from a lot of the registrants and guests today, but also in some of your other workshops and sessions, that this is kind of a perennial favorite topic, which I guess is a great segue into, Debi, how are city clerks doing?
Well, I can tell you, I do a lot of sessions. I do a lot of coaching with clerks. I talk to a lot of clerks. They're a big part of what I do in my consulting and training. And after the pandemic, the pandemic put them into hybrid meetings, all the different types of meetings. But I'm finding now clerks are just, the balance is hard. The public demands, the staff demands, everything is coming at them. And sometimes it's hard. Their stress levels are extremely high. And do you want me to go through these bullet points, Josh?
Yeah, sure. We'll display them, or we can just organically move through them. Yeah.
Okay, totally. One of the things I'm finding is, yes, we have our our associations like AMCTO and Zones and IIMC, but a lot of clerks are still missing that supportive network to provide, the guidance and encouragement. And there's a lot of new clerks, and I encourage the clerks that have a lot of experience to really get into the mentorship game, to really start providing the new clerks coming in. They need that guidance. They need that one-on-one, that encouragement. And I think that really helps build their confidence, which is the biggest area that I'm finding new clerks especially, are struggling, is getting that confidence to work with council, to work with staff, and especially if you have a council that is perhaps not the easiest to get along with. And, that can be hard. That can really erode your self-confidence. And I think it's important to really, step back and go, okay, can I manage this situation? And sometimes, it's up to the mayor to manage that difficult behavior, or the CAO. But struggling to maintain that confidence when it's coming at you in the council chambers can be difficult.
Mhm.
And I think one of the biggest steps I always suggest to clerks is you have to learn to say no. And hopefully we'll talk a little bit more about areas that they can say no. But one of the things I find is the clerk's office tends to be the office that everybody puts all the little projects that nobody knows else what to do with. The clerk will manage that, because the clerk is gets things done, project tasks, they're on constant deadlines, so they know how to do project management really well.
Mhm.
And I think it's learning to say no to survive in what you do. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I was hoping to pick this apart a little bit. You mentioned there were a lot of new clerks. Is this kind of a recent trend, just following, what may be kind of more of a civically engaged population with all the kind of polarizing politics in these trying times? Or is this kind of just a generational handoff between the last generation of clerks and the new generation coming in?
It is. And I know there's been some studies out there. I know AMCTO did something. AMCTO, for those who don't know, is the Ontario one that I'm a member of. And I think they said in the next 3 to 5 years, it's 45% of clerks are going to be retiring. That's a huge number. And when you think that when I was a clerk, you had to get 7 to 10 years experience as a deputy. Sometimes they're getting a year and they're thrown into the clerk position. And a lot of what a clerk does is cyclical. So you learn on the job. You can go to school for all you want, but you still need to learn on the job. And elections only come around so often. So it's hard to really balance all that when you're new.
Yeah. And you mentioned, I mean, that 45% of clerks retiring, that's an eye-popping number. Obviously, if they're at retirement age, they've probably, accumulated a decade or more of service. Two questions based on that. What is, I think you mentioned this in the deputy clerk position, that takes maybe 5 to 7 years to get the learning curve kind of completed. Is that a kind of a general, how long does it take to get proficient at the job? And then the second question, the follow-up, is how can that new generation of clerks, or that new office holder, draw upon the experience and the expertise of the outgoing clerk?
Well, that's where you have to get into a mentorship program. Find a mentor. You definitely have to find a mentor if you're new, and join the associations, join your network within the clerks, maybe in your area. And I think for the clerks that are leaving the profession, or they've got, 3 to 5 years, start putting that succession plan in place so that you know who is going to be taking your place. And the other thing, the 5 to 7 years, in Ontario, the elections are every 4 years. So if you start hopefully you never have to start an election year, because you just hit the ground running and you don't really learn, you're just surviving. But it's really, you have to go through that cycle of running an election. And that takes time. That takes over everything you're doing. So I do believe it takes a good 5 to 7 years to really get comfortable in the role of the clerk, because it changes so much.
Yeah. And then obviously getting accustomed to some of the strong personalities that may be sitting in your municipal council. And you mentioned the clerk's office is typically, I don't call it a dumping ground, but a lot of otherwise unassigned projects go there, because the clerk is that person behind the scenes that has that kind of operational center of excellence, so to speak. How do you say no to a project?
Well, this is where it is. This is what I do is you got to have your data and your stats. So if I had a CAO came to me and said, and this is what it happened numerous times, Debbie, you and your team going to be handling this project. I would let it sit for a bit, but I would then get my stats and go, okay, here's the projects we're working on, here's the resources. And then I would make an appointment to go back to the CAO and go, here's the project, here's how much it's going to take of our time. These are the projects we're working on. which one do you want us to take off the table if we're to do that project?
Mhm.
So you have to go in with stats. You can't just say, oh, we're overworked, can't do it. That's not going to cut it. You've got to go in and go, here's the project, here's the hours, this is what we're working on. Even if you're a one-person office, a one-person clerk's office, you have to be able to say no to those projects, because you won't have the time to do everything. And I think you have to be able to provide the statistics back to the CAO. And, sometimes 90% of the time it worked for me. The 10% it didn't. You just have to kind of make the best of the situation.
Yeah,
Mhm.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
I think that kind of flicks out a little bit of, allocation of resources that's just not capital or, taxpayer dollars, but also the finite number of hours any given clerk has within their hour or their day or their week.
Mhm. It's, when you look at you, especially if it's a council week, you're not just working during the day, you're working during the evening, and you're on a cycle. And then
Mhm.
to put projects into that cycle, it's not an easy thing to do. Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then, and just, I guess, to that, like, what are some of the factors? I talked a little bit in the green room before the show about kind of a personal mantra for building confidence or setting a positive intent for the day. What are are clerks missing that, or are they just trying to get into the routine of the job as quickly as possible without or possibly sacrificing their own well-being in a sense?
Yeah. I think it's a bit of both. Some of the clerks I've been working with, which I'm trying to get them into, as I was telling you, Josh, I start my day by just best day ever, and I bounce out of bed. It gets my brain focused. And one of the things with clerks is plan your day the night before, because, and you have to really manage your time. And we don't take care of ourselves. Clerks don't take care of ourselves. And I know from firsthand, when I turned 40, I had a TIA, which is as close to a heart attack as you can get, because I was working full time as a clerk. I was a single parent. I was the PTA. I was trying to go to all the sports. And that's when I learned you have to not so much manage your time, but manage your calendar and put time in there to manage your day. And I think we get caught up in the cycle of just constantly going, and doing catch up all the time. But I think we have to take the time to map out our day, block time off, and really focus on, okay, is that project going to affect me today?
Mhm.
And how much can I get done? Yeah.
Yeah. That's great. We got some great questions coming in from the audience. We'll handle those towards the end of our kind of panel interview here. So please do keep submitting them. Our friend Brennan
Enough
is,
questions.
is on the back end. So we'll get to the next slide here, Debbie. We've already kind of touched upon these a little bit.
Yeah.
Avoiding the catch-all kind of misnomer for the city clerk's department. You mentioned just really bringing the data to the conversation of, hey, we have a limited number of resources, both in capital and or human capital. And then I really wanted to dig in on the second point a little bit of don't make massive changes suddenly, especially as a new clerk. We talked about a little bit about that transition from a clerk who may be retiring to a person who may be assuming the office for the first time. Why do you recommend against making changes initially?
I think it's important to really understand the culture, ultra understand the environment they're going to be working in. And as you take your time, that's how you're going to build the trust. You're
Mhm.
going to build the trust with council, rather than, coming in and looking at the agenda and going, I don't like the agenda template. I don't like how we do minutes. Sometimes the culture is council likes minutes a certain way. So I will say, do those changes gradually and build up the rapport and your trust with council. I've only had to come into an environment once where I had to make massive changes, but I was hired for that purpose. I
Mhm.
was hired to go into a clerk's department that had some issues. So my council was expecting changes. If they're not, do it gradually, because change is difficult for everybody, but change is really difficult for council. And even if sometimes you just change a header on an agenda, that can throw somebody off. So really, honestly, they're sensitive. So take your time, really learn, build your rapport with council, build your rapport with the mayor, the senior management team. Of course, your team is going to be the one that you really want to build the rapport and understand how everybody works. That's the
Mhm.
big part of being a leader, is
Yeah.
understanding your team.
I'm curious about this because I think it's less of a trend in the States among some municipalities and regionalities, but I know that amalgamation is still an ongoing thing in Canada in terms of combining municipalities or regional governments under the provincial heading. How do you deal with that when you're kind of coming into a net new situation? I spoke with a chief administrative officer over the summer at an event, and he said, I said, hey, how long you been with the city? He said, since beginning of January of this year. I was like, what do you mean? He's like, the city was just established this year. So how do you come in a kind of a blank slate situation?
Ooh, that's not an easy thing to do. And yes, there's a lot of changes to do. One of the municipalities that I had to come into as the clerk was there had been fraud. And so I came in with a fairly blank slate of a department.
Mhm.
So I had to build the trust, had to build the confidence. And when there's so much external change going on, you can't worry about all the external change. You just need to worry about what's happening in your environment.
Right.
Because if you start getting yourself worried about amalgamations and that's happening, yes, be aware of it, but really focus on your job, your tasks, just to
Mhm.
maintain your sanity and just keep moving forward. Yeah, not easy, not easy. Mm.
And you mentioned building that trust with the kind of the executive leaders and the counselors, but you say don't be best friends with them. Is that a kind of a was that learned the hard way, I guess?
It was learned the hard way. It was learned the hard way. And earlier in my career, and that's when I've learned that um, build your confidence, build a professional boundary. But yes, I was earlier in my career, and one of the members of council I had known since I was young, and I couldn't be professional. I was still being treated like, the neighbor down the street. So you really have to come in with a different mindset,
Mhm.
and it's all about your mindset, and have your I never, if a member of council said, oh, just call me and by their first name, I never did, ever. It
Yeah.
was always counselor, mayor. And I think you have to set that professionalism right from the start. And then believe it or not, it builds that confidence, but it also builds the trust, especially with your mayor, CAO. Those are kind of your two key people that you as a clerk are going to be dealing with, and you want to make sure you have their confidence.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And how do you, beyond just the kind of the regulated or the required meetings, how do you build that relationship? Is it bringing donuts on a Friday morning, or what are some of the tips that you use to build a better rapport with those leaders?
Well, one of the things I always suggest, especially for new clerks, is try and get, prior to the council meeting or committee meeting, I always like to have a meeting with the CAO and the mayor, sit down with them and go over the agenda.
Hmm.
And so that I would be going into that council meeting aware of kind of what may be happening politically, maybe aware of what's happening from a staff angle, so that I was never caught off guard. But it built that rapport that the clerk is a key part of that meeting. The clerk is not just about preparing the agenda, getting the minutes done. The clerk is the advisor to the chair and to the CAO. And I think when you get those meetings going, they will make a whole big difference. You're at the table then. You're a
Hmm.
part of those decision making, because the mayor and the council, that's your board of directors. So you want to be right front and center as part of the dynamics. Yeah.
I love that because in kind of more the governance public corporate governance world, it's always recommended that the chair or the executive of the committee does a pre-read of the room, so there's no surprises like you mentioned. Just, hey, go around the horn, call people, chat with them, say, hey, what are some of your concerns going into the meeting this week,
Yeah.
just to have a better understanding of where people are at, both emotionally and then just professionally or within their own roles. So
Well, it also encouraged, I got into the habit of members of council, if they had a motion they were going to be bringing up at that meeting, I encouraged them to come and chat with me first so we could fine tune the wording. And, if it was one that I felt the mayor needed to know about, I would let that member of council know. Are you going to let the mayor know? Because if not, I will, because that's going to affect our meeting.
Mhm.
So being open up front is also really important when you're dealing with the members of council. But I think as clerks, it's important to be able to look at those amendments, those notices beforehand, because you can put your professional eye on that. Mhm.
Yeah, and understand if you need to allocate more time within the meeting for debate or contention or anything.
Exactly. And that's where when you meet on the Monday, you're going over those things. I know that this counselor is going to be bringing up, this is their area of concern. It just builds a more harmonious meeting environment. Mhm.
And then this is almost kind of counterintuitive to what we were just talking about, but don't be afraid to take risks. What do you
Yeah.
mean by that? Is that personal risks like skydiving, or I mean, what are we what are we talking?
No. When you're in environment, I think to build your self-confidence, you have to take risks. And when say you've been given one of those projects, those one-off projects, and it doesn't go well,
Mhm.
you have to go, okay, not get down on yourself, but go, what did I learn from it? Because that's how your team's gonna evolve and grow. And taking risk could be maybe moving to a platform like eScribe. That's a whole, if you're used to a paper-based system and then you want to move to eScribe, you're taking that risk going, oh my goodness, is council gonna, how am I going to manage this? Because I did have one project that didn't go well.
Mhm.
And I didn't say, I'm sorry we didn't do it. I just said, okay. When I went into the senior management team and they said, oh, it didn't work well. I said, this is what we've learned. And we also said, and these are some suggestions we'd like in the tender process. So
Mhm.
you go back with the positives instead of going, we didn't do well, but take those risks. So, I was in part of the team when we did elections were going to vote tabulators, and those days was a big thing. But I mean, let's do it. Let's do it. You have to put yourself out there, because that's number one. It's going to build your confidence, and it's going to build your leadership niche within the clerks environment. Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Mhm.
love that you mentioned also just the almost the professionalism of, not, oh, that's on me, I failed, or I took a big risk and it didn't pay off, but saying, here are the things that we learned, and keeping it in that professional manner.
Yeah.
But also, the other side of that payoff, that return on investment, could be, money savings, time savings for the clerk, just being better serving your constituents, both in city hall or out in the citizens as well. So I love that.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Now this is the real meat of the matter here.
Mm.
Uh, we talked about this a little bit, but you're talking about building confidence and taking charge. Debi, what if I told you I was an introvert? I have a hard time building rapport with my colleagues. How do you kind of tease the extrovert out of maybe a more introverted personality?
And that's really hard. Because when I started my career, I was actually more introverted than extroverted.
Hmm.
And I think the biggest thing as an introvert is you have to understand your strengths. And that's the biggest thing. And understand that sometimes, you've got to go out of that. Say, as an introvert, you're not good with public speaking. So how can you learn to be better as a public speaker? Put that part as your leadership plan, and don't be afraid. Like with me, I'm a big picture thinker. So don't get me in the weeds. So I always made sure my team, which quite often, you're going to have the research, the records type of professions where they tend to be more introverts, but those are the ones that keep the clerk going. So you've got to learn to where your strengths, and I don't like the word weaknesses.
Yeah.
As we had this conversation, Josh, you have top strengths and you have bottom strengths. That's how I look at it.
Hmm.
And when you have those bottom strengths, you delegate them. And when you have team members that are introverts, you want to make sure you as a leader, as the clerk, are providing them with opportunities that match their personality. So if you have an introvert on your team and they like doing all the research for bylaws, then somehow you got to make that happen for them, because they got to feel valued. But at the same time, you want to challenge them to start going out of that introvert zone. I have one client right now. She just became a clerk and very much an introvert. And so it's a challenge every day, but she does little baby steps. But I think there's this principle that if you take small steps every day, you can slowly come out of your introvert zone. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just, I mean, my personal experience, being able to identify that, whether you take a strengths assessment through Strength Finder 2.0 or a DISC personality assessment, just being able to define your strengths. You know, a lot of I think a lot of those psychological testing things leave a lot to be desired. But if it sounds true, it probably is when you take those tests and get those results. And then being able to maybe even communicate that. You mentioned if you're leading a staff, if you're more than a clerk of one, clerk's department of one, leading your staff and identifying those strengths for your staff and saying, hey, I'm really good at you know, communicating or collaborating, but I'm less so on detail oriented or getting into the weeds. Do you find that communicating that in kind of a team meeting setting is beneficial there?
It is in the team meeting. You have to do it a bit of both, because you have to really understand. Everybody leads and understands and communicates differently.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really important to understand your team members. So, for example, if you're an introvert and you're in a team meeting, to be centered out for doing something good may be the worst thing that would happen to you.
Terrifying.
Right. So as a clerk, as the leader, you've got to know that that's not how they're going to survive.
Mm-hmm.
So they would prefer you calling them into the office going, you did a really good job on that. I just want you to know. So it's really about that emotional intelligence and understanding how each of your members work, because that's how it's in my team member. I would stay right up front. I'm a big picture thinker, but I always made sure that my team could handle the details, because that wasn't my strength. Don't get me in the weeds. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I love the kind of the yin and the yang between the you know, the council, where you might have the over indexed on extroverts and the clerk's office, which might be over indexed on introverts. Guard your time. I love this suggestion, Debbie. It's something I found a lot of value in, just blocking off time for heads down work, for, you know, getting the details figured out on a project. How do you suggest people actually go about blocking their time? Is it setting a meeting of one, or is it just making sure that nobody can come in over the top of your calendar and schedule over your time? How does that work for you?
Well, it's a bit of both. You know, when I was at the regional office, I would make sure that I only accepted meetings that I was really needed at. Mm-hmm. If I wasn't needed at a meeting, I would provide my comments for that meeting. So part of it is really looking at, am I really needed at that meeting? Or are they just doing the list of everybody's required? So I would really go through and see what meetings I was needed at. And then once I started doing blocking my time, like doing calendar management rather than time management, it made the world a difference. So that, you know, if I had council meeting on a Monday night, I had to block off some time that next day to make sure that I could be there for my team to review the minutes, have the timelines. So it's getting selfish with your time. And clerks have a hard time of doing that, because we're all about public service. Mm-hmm. But it is, at times, you have to be selfish with your time. Yeah.
Yeah, and I would even argue that you have to be selfish with your time in the interest of your taxpayers or your constituents. If you're hired to do a job, and you can't do it as effectively unless you have that time devoted to solely focusing on one task. And it also brings up my favorite phrase: "This meeting could have been an email." So
exactly. You know, we've all been to those meetings. You'll go to 10 meetings, and 9 are great, but you don't remember the 9 great meetings. You're going to remember the 10th one that was like just all over the map.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And then you mentioned communicating your priorities to your team, and I think this goes along with that calendar and or time management. What kind of priorities are you typically? Is that just kind of the day-to-day or the week-to-week priorities, or like, hey, this is the big goal we have to accomplish for the week, or is it more from a personal and role-based priority?
I think it's all encompassing. What I think is really important when you communicate your priorities for the team, I think number one, you got to sit down with the team that's going to be handling the council secretariat part.
Mhm.
Then I think you need the whole encompassing team. Okay, here's our week tasks. And then you also have to keep your big goals kind of all visual.
Yeah.
And I think that's important. So it's a bit of everything, but communication, sometimes you can't always have those meetings if you've got all the committee council coming at you, but it's really communicating that everybody's on the same page.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mhm.
Great. And then this last one, have the right tools. You need to exceed. Of course, we're a provider of meeting management software, but in an increasingly digital world, one of the biggest ROIs that we've discovered that we can provide for customers is time savings and effort savings. And you mentioned project management and priority management there. Just as we're becoming an increasingly digital world, especially in city and municipal services, what other kind of recommendations beyond meeting management software would you have in terms of solutions?
Well, I think you have to really tap into your meeting management system first so
Mhm.
that you can use it to, get your council resolutions out quickly, get your actions, but also, use a project managed system that works for you to manage your time so that you're putting in, okay, the agenda is going to be ready this date. And look at the workflows within the software. How can you use that workflow to make your day better? So if you're going to staff meeting, look at all the reports that are coming up to the different agendas. Really strategize and be prepared. And I think that's key. And block everything so you know exactly it's running like a fine wheel.
Yeah.
Mhm. I would strategize everything.
Yeah.
It's worked for me now. I
Uh,
was a master strategist.
Yeah, and one of the things I love about just project management software, and I'm a technology geek, of course, because I'm in a software marketing position, but it's just documentation, not only just from the point of view of public regulatory compliance that you have to document and publicly post your meetings, but you say, hey, here are the all the minutes, or here are the workflows that we're experiencing right now. If you're out of time or out of capacity, you can point to that documentation within a project or a meeting management platform and say, hey, there's no available time within here. What do you want me to do with that?
It's
So,
true. And also use that information. I recommend clerks do an annual clerks report. And
mhm.
you say how much time you're spending in your meetings, how long it takes to do your minutes. And you provide that. I encourage you to provide it for council. Sometimes that's not possible. At least give it to your senior management team and say, this is how long it takes to prepare agenda, review agenda. Those stats are key. Those
Mhm.
are key to saying, because a lot of what a clerk's office does is kind of behind the scenes. It's the wheel that keeps everything going. And
Right.
sometimes you have to what I call sonic boom those accomplishments and go, this is what we got done this year. These are the projects we had. This is how many agendas we did, how many advisory, how many council, how many committee. This is
Mhm.
how long the meetings were. You know, those are all key stats you can get easily, but they really justify how you can, number one, get more resources if needed, and
Yeah.
also manage, how many projects you're managing. Yeah.
Yeah. And just say, I think you mentioned this, and obviously the clerk's duties are cyclical in nature to accommodate the council meetings, but those numbers accumulate over time. So it's not just, hey, I spent an hour on this a week. 52 weeks later, that's an entire work week that you spent on maybe one part of meeting prep. How can we reduce that or optimize that so the stakeholders and taxpayer dollars are going a little bit farther? Um,
Exactly.
yeah. Okay, this is probably another great section we'll spend some time on.
Yeah.
Getting the seat at the table. You mentioned kind of insinuating yourself or getting more accommodate or in the accommodation of the city managers and mayor and other chief executives. Um, I guess we'll just go through this a little bit, like
Yeah.
and tell them what the team what you offer. How especially for a new clerk, how do you kind of break into that? Hey, I could
Well,
do this for you.
yeah, and sometimes, well, we'll start out sometimes. The clerks are, if they're in a larger organization, I'm seeing some of them are now having to report to a commissioner or a director, and you're getting missed in those senior management teams. That's where you've got to be at that table. First of all, you got to be at the senior management team, and if you're not, you've got to tell them what you can offer. The agenda, the reports coming up. You've got the ties to the community. You have to be at that table. And it's important that you deliver on your position in those meetings, because the board of directors, every decision that council makes, they're your board of directors. You're the pivotal wheel. The clerk's that wheel that's keeping those decisions going. So I would say, really explain what the team can offer. And even going as far as, the records management, you talk about how the agendas, reports and everything, that's really important to be at the board, is the table as well, to say, this is how all the records are handled. And, sometimes those little silent things are forgotten, and really understand those personalities at the senior management team so that you get them all on your side, on your team, and you understand what they need. So for example, I had one department head who just didn't like reviewing his reports. So I said, well, how about I show you some tricks to go through in a report to make sure that you're catching all that is needed before you sign off. And that made a difference in how he started enjoying the approval process. So you have to understand those little nuances.
Yeah, it's almost like the old phrase, make yourself useful, right? Like you have to,
yeah, you want to be indispensable. Your team wants to be that resource. And sometimes, as I say, it is hard if you have if you're a small office. So you have to do the best you can to deliver on your public service.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that, because what I love about thinking about municipal governments and public service is that the role is very well defined. The job roles and responsibilities are for everybody to see.
Oldest profession in local government is the treasurer and clerk. Yeah.
And then what do you do with a typical personality, Debbie? Somebody who's maybe doesn't think very highly of the clerk's office or the role of the clerk. How do you make them better understand that, other than making yourself useful? What are some other ways that you can kind of get them on your team, so to speak?
Well, and sometimes it doesn't work, and you just have to understand it's their issue, not your issue.
Yeah.
And you have to, but I think when you start showing value, it's very rare that I wasn't able to get someone on the team. You don't have to like each other. It's about building that respect.
Yeah.
That you both have a job to do, and this is how you're going to do it together. And because we're not always going to get along, but you just have to have that respect. And this is what I can offer you, and start building the team that way.
Yeah. I like the idea that the honorifics, the yes, mayor so and so, or yes, councilor so and so, kind of almost paves the way for that mutual respect, because it's within the office titles rather than the personal relationships.
It's a small thing, but it's a big thing. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's great. I'm curious about this one. Community organizations, how do they figure into the clerk's role, and what's the benefit of getting involved in some of your local chapters there?
You would be surprised what a clerk can find out when they go out to the community. It builds
bad stuff.
It builds the rapport.
Okay.
It's, because I always made sure that I was involved in some, whether I went to speak about sometimes I would go to I did a session at a library board, how the agendas are posted, how to read the post, how to read the agendas. Sometimes it's just things like that. But it then paves the way when they want to come to council, to do a deputation and tell event. They've got that communication link. And they know they can call the clerk or the clerk's office, and things are going to be explained to them. So it's really building more the rapport for your community. I happen to be fortunate that I was clerking in the municipality that I grew up in. So it was important for me to get out in the community and say, okay, this is what's coming up. Never overstepping your boundary as a clerk. Right? You're the clerk, and you never want to be promising things that you can't deliver on. But it certainly helped when I was running an election. I would be able to, what do you think of this building or this location, and really get some good feedback. So I think it's important as a clerk to get involved in organizations.
That's great. And then it almost goes to the same advice you have for counselors and executives. Getting to know them makes things a lot easier. And if you can show your value and say, hey, I can do XYZ for you, or my office is here for you to accomplish these tasks, I think it just smooths that communication channel that much more.
It really does. And especially if you have new counselors on board, you want to make sure that they understand the council secretariat function. So you want to spend some time with the new counselors, say, this is how we work, this is how things run, this, especially helping them understand parliamentary procedure, give them the basics. So those are all the tools to make your job easier. That's the key.
That's
Mhm.
great. Okay. Now we're getting into more of the personal well-being things. One question I have before we go into the personal well-being, I was curious. We talked about kind of the generational transition, or the transition in general. That 45% of clerks are set to retire in the near future. Do you also feel like there's kind of I don't want to say political, and I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I know here in the States, a lot of local municipality meetings have gotten a lot more contentious, a lot more polarized. Do you have any tips or advice for clerks who are running those meetings to keep them civil and within the kind of domain of civil discourse and not um,
Mm,
energetic or outspoken opinions?
yeah. First of all, make sure that the mayor is well prepared.
Mhm.
The chair or the chair of the meeting, because you never want to get into the role as the clerk as everyone thinking you're running the meeting. So the chair is running the meeting. So in those type of things, you want to make sure that your chair is confident in their role. That's your role as the clerk. So how can you build confidence in the chair if they're not comfortable with? Can you prepare an agenda with notes to make sure they follow along? And build like your training with council, like how do they handle dissenting voices? Give them tools
Mhm.
to say, if you're in a meeting, I would do a training on just how to handle dissenting voices. So, and you have to take control. The chair is going to control that. So
Yeah,
that's the biggest part, is that background training that you do is going to be pivotal to how your meetings work. Mhm.
great. Yeah,
But
criteria
never take ownership for running the meeting. Never take ownership.
behind the scenes.
Take
Yeah,
ownership for being the advisor to the
yeah,
chair.
that's
Mhm.
great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Did I answer
Um,
the question?
Yeah, that was great. Yeah, and
Good.
I'm just always curious about that because here in my local municipality, school board meetings have recently gotten really kind of controversial. So I'm always just interested to hear what some of the best practices there for.
Yeah.
Um, all right, balance. I love this. I do some of these things myself. Can you walk us through some of your kind
Yeah.
of tried and true principles here for a more well balanced life?
Keeping a journal. And I think journaling is now more popular. I've been doing it for years. And I just recently got my older son to start journaling. And journaling is really just it's to help you move your mindset.
Hmm.
So journal, to say, maybe it's a gratitude journal, just say 3 things every day that went well. And it really does set your day. It's just like when starting the day, best day ever. And, I'm still trying to meditate. I'm not that great at it, but I'm working at it. It's learning to quiet, because what happens is the clerk's environment is so on all the time. And you have all these squirrels in your head going round and round. You've got to learn, even if you take 5 minutes during your office day and shut the door and just try and just go, okay. But journaling is key. Either you do it in the morning or the end of the day, whichever
Hmm.
works for you. It could even be your journal for your calendar, that at the end of the day, I put it out, I think it's further on, that you write down what you did well instead of focusing on what you didn't accomplish. I had this chat with this a clerk earlier this week, and I loved it. And he said, I actually put 3 things I've already got done on my agenda at the beginning of the week. He said, so by the end of the week, I know I'm going to definitely have 3 things I can take off. I thought that was brilliant, but that works for his mindset.
That's great. Yeah.
Walk every day. Even if it means getting out of your office for 5 minutes and walking around and getting some fresh air. I think it's really important. And this is one thing I got taught years ago, was visualize how you want your day to be. So, if I had a 45-minute drive to work, I'd be going, okay, this is how I want my day to go. This is what's going to happen. And it really gets you in a really good frame of mind.
Mhm.
I've always been really positive, and I try to, you're going to have down days, but if you go in visualizing, feeling positive, then it does make a difference. And we have a habit of getting caught up in our work and forgetting to take breaks. We talked about, our methods. I like to use the Pomodoro method. I got taught that fairly early in my career, that I would work for 20 minutes, take a short break, work for 20 minutes, take a short break. And I only answered emails certain times of the day. First thing in the morning, just before lunch, and the end of the day. So you don't get caught up in all that trying to handle your emails. Now, on council day would be the rule, would be an exception. You kind of got to monitor your email fairly throughout the day on that day.
Yeah, I love these, and especially you mentioned the things that are kind of the focus on the positives. One takeaway that I've always had from a mentor I worked with, they said, no one is going to be a better advocate for you than you. You know all the details. You know all the work that went into that project. You have to self-advocate with your wins. And then if anybody's interested in putting this on the reading list, The Inner Game of Tennis, it's a sports psychology book, but the whole principle of it is that you visualize the success. You're not trying to correct mistakes or, correct your swing in real time. You simply visualize success and your body will follow through. So those are my two recommendations, even though they were not.
So true.
All right. Well, I think this is, we're right on time right here for the Q&A part of the session, which is always my favorite. I got a couple things coming in from Brennan, who's monitoring the chat. So we'll go from earliest question to most recent. You mentioned resources for clerks. This is from Barb. What are they, or what do you recommend looking at first in terms of resources for clerks and doing a better job at your role as a clerk?
First resources is look to the association that you're part of. So if you're part of IIMC in the States, or you're part of, LGMA out in British Columbia, AMCTO here in Ontario, look at the resources they have. And especially if you're new, look at, do they have a mentorship program, or do they have, with IMC, how do you move forward to get your CMC and your MMC? Because that's how you're going to meet people. And same with the MCTO, they have various programs. So look at those resources first, and start being prepared to, get the education. That's where you're going to meet the people. And if they have quarterly meetings or monthly meetings, go to them. Especially if you're an introvert, go to them, because that's where you're going to meet people on a one-to-one basis, which may be more comfortable.
Something recently I learned about, this is IIMC. I don't know if there's similar programs available. There are grants available to attend the annual conference for a certain number of clerks. So it doesn't even have to be a question of budget. If you qualify for a grant, you can go attend these meetings. Obviously, they want to enrich you with the resources and the training and the tools to help you become a better clerk.
Yeah. Those are really good resources.
Yeah. And the other part I love about that is that, it kind of, there's a community beyond your community, right? Of people who are going through similar situations. They may know of a problematic piece of software or vendor out there that you may want to know ahead of time based on their experiences. So there's so much learning to do out there. So
there is. Yeah.
Great. Next question here. This is from Anonymous. I don't think that's their real name, but are there any statutes that outline the powers and authorities of an elected clerk that might not be adopted by the city council? That is a very specific question.
Yeah. Well, say, for example, I'll give you the example of Ontario, where I've been a clerk. We have what's called the Municipal Act, and the role of the clerk, functions of the clerk are outlined within that act. And clerks will have outlined within the act and probably 100 other pieces of the act. So when we're running election, we're going to be looking at the Elections Act. I know in the States, it's very different.
Yeah.
You're going to have the state may have different appointment processes. So you have to really, that's very specific to where you are.
Yeah, and I know here in my home state of Indiana, there are certainly requirements at every level, from village to town to city, and then above that. So yeah, you'll have to definitely do some research on your own there and local regulations. This question is from Claudine. She says, how do you balance showing your skills and value when your boss slash town manager does all the meetings, work, and discussion with council instead of me, the clerk?
That happens a lot. You've got to, number one, really get yourself at that table. So you got to get yourself at the table. And this is where you're going to start doing your sonic boom, your accomplishments. So when I was talking about doing that annual report, that summary, then this is where you want to do that summary maybe to the mayor and to the manager.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you have to work within this environment. I had this happen to me, and I just made myself invaluable to the town manager to the point where they went, okay, you can start taking over these tasks.
Yeah.
But you really got to start showing your value, like showing up to those meetings, provide even a weekly email. Here's all the functions that we handle through the clerks, and sit down with that person and say, this is how I can help you.
Mm-hmm.
And, they have to be ready to listen.
Yeah. I love the idea of a weekly summary, even if it's just reporting on a long-term project. Yeah. But then also
building that awareness, building the awareness.
Right. Even if you have to iterate it many times. But I love the idea too of not like, hey, this is my job, but how can I take this off your plate? Or how can I do this for you so you don't have to? I love that idea of just kind of repositioning the question a little bit.
Yeah.
Okay. This is a something. Can you recommend something that is the absolute basics, Clerks 101? If you're starting from scratch, where would you start, Debbie?
Well, it depends where you are.
Mm-hmm.
So, for example, IIMC would have programs for their CMC. So you look to your state association. You look to where can you start with the basics. But this is where you get a mentor. This is where you get a mentor who's going to guide you step by step. And, for example, AMCTO, they have Municipal Clerks Institute. So does IIMC. So that's where you have to start. Number one, get your mentor. You have to get a mentor because you'll never survive if you're brand new and you need that guidance. And then look to your association and say, okay, they all have beginning programs to get some, and join network of clerks. Just sit down and go, this is what I need to know.
Yeah.
There isn't like a box that says Clerks 101 for everybody, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's something different.
It would be great to do. Yeah.
Maybe we'll come up with Clerks 101 as that. But I also love that idea of, you might seem new to you or it's fresh to you, especially considering that 45% of clerks are on their way out or to retirement. But there's a whole community of people who are doing the same work that you are, who are encountering the same problems that you are, may have already have a solution that you haven't thought of.
Mm-hmm. And a lot of what a clerk does, you have to actually do it to understand it.
Mm-hmm.
So I kept a book. Anytime I handled something new, I wrote down how I handled that task and it went in a binder. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Best practices kind of. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess that's a really great question to segue. This is my own personal question for the Q&A of how do you know you're ready for either kind of the next organization or the next municipality in your career as a clerk? You've been a part of several municipalities. How do you know you're ready, and what is kind of the step in terms of confidence or proficiency that says I'm ready to move up to a bigger municipality or a bigger organization?
And that's where your leadership plan comes in place. Mm-hmm. So you want to know your 3-year, 5-year goals, and you be building towards that. So if you're just starting out and your ultimate goal is to be a clerk in this municipality, you want to either talk to that clerk that's in the role now, say, okay, what do I need? And then you build your leadership plan from that. That's great. So many of us don't put a plan in place or goals, but you need to do that, especially in the clerks environments, because there's certain things you need to get in order to be the clerk. And you'll know when you're ready for new challenges. You'll intuitively know going, I'm ready.
All of a sudden gets very easy, or
maybe not easy, but less difficult. Want new challenges. Yeah.
If you're attempting, this is from another anonymous question, and I love this because it gets back to that interpersonal. If you're trying to build a more cohesive relationship with the manager or the mayor, and it's refused or it's not taken in the spirit that it's given, like what would be the next step there? Just what do you do when you're kind of rejected a little bit or refused?
Yeah, and you know what, it isn't always going to work. There's going to be the times where the mayor is just a one-man show and they're managing it. You just have to be really stellar at what you do in your meetings, and just start showing your leadership niche in different ways. And you just you can't take it personally, and that's going to happen. I had one mayor who just did not want those meetings, so I just would do subtle things. I would, if it was going to be a contentious meeting, I would leave on their table the script for the day, and I'd go, just in case you need some tips. And they would go, no, I don't. I go, well, it's just there if you need it. And it was those little things, and you just be positive, and just, you can't change that if they don't want to coordinate with you, but you just make yourself invaluable in other ways.
Yeah, or kill them with kindness is another phrase.
Yeah, exactly.
I do love that, though. Even if you can't get that, that two-way interpersonal meeting, maybe it's, you send them an email with like, hey, here are the priority or the main bullet points I think are important for the council meeting coming up, or just expressing your point of view and just being very consistent with that. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have exhausted all the questions. I got maybe one more coming in here. I'm waiting for it. Let's see if I can find it in the chat first. Oh, while we're speaking here, I'm trying to find the last meeting. We do have a very quick 30-second poll. If the members in the audience can go ahead and take a look at this, I guarantee you it won't take 30 seconds. But it helps us understand how we can better present content in the future. And then if you are interested in our solution, we can provide that. And then short of that, Debi, any closing thoughts as we wrap up here as far as how to build confidence as a chair, or not as a chair, I'm sorry, as a clerk?
I think you have to remember that confidence comes from within. And if you're looking at your confidence to be built from the external factors of how does that person like me, or does that mayor like me, or does that member, that won't work for you. It is, you have to look from within. And that's why I say build your leadership niches. Get really good at records management. Get really good at handling your agendas. Do it bit by bit and become expert in the fields. That builds your confidence. Yeah.
All right, we'll close with one more question from Todd here. What is the clerk's role at council if procedures are not being followed as per bylaws or Robert's parliamentary rules?
Okay. This is where you have to, the chair is responsible for the meeting. Number one, is the clerk, you want to make sure you're seated beside the chair. And if rules are being broken, then you're going to be passing little notes to that clerk, however, or to that chair. And if it's ongoing and the chair is ignoring you, then you've got to somehow get some training in place for those members of council to understand the reason, because your parliamentary procedure can be a team building tool. So it's making sure that they understand the risk when things aren't being followed. So start with the chair of the meeting.
Yeah, I love that you brought it back to risk, because obviously there are compliance factors, there are regulatory factors in every public meeting that need to be followed. So great. Debi, thank you so much for joining us and spending some time with us. We love your expert advice and just all your great experience and advice. So thank you so much. And thank you to the audience for visiting us today. If you'd like more from Debi, you can visit her at debiwilcox.com. And if you'd like to learn more about eScribe, please visit us at eScribemeetings.com. Have a great afternoon. And thanks again, Debi.
Thank you.
All right.